Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Charlie State and Nagat Monchetti.
Our headlines today: a £500 payment to everyone who tests positive for Covid-19. One of the ideas in a leaked government document as ministers look for ways to encourage more people to stick to the rules.
The race against time in care homes to get residents vaccinated in the face of growing numbers of deaths from Covid.
Good morning. Burnley are celebrating something rather special. They become the first team in nearly 4 years to win at the home of the champions Liverpool in the Premier League.
And it's frosty and icy out there this morning, but there will be some showers around and plenty of sunshine in the east. I'll have all your details coming up right here on Breakfast.
Good morning. It's Friday the 22nd of January. Our top story this morning: anyone who tests positive for coronavirus in England could be in line for a £500 payment, and a new plan's being considered by the Department of Health.
It's one of a number of options being discussed to improve stay-at-home compliance. There are concerns that the current financial support isn't enough and that some low-paid workers cannot afford to self-isolate.
We're joined now by our political correspondent, Ben Wright. So, Ben, this, we understand, is amongst a number of ideas. Do you want to take us through the principles of the idea and where it is in terms of the decision-making process within government?
Sure. Morning, Charlie. Well, look, clearly it's imperative from the government's perspective that people go and get tested if they have symptoms of Covid, and then they self-isolate if they are confirmed to have the virus or they're contacted by NHS test track and trace. Now, for people who are on very low incomes, this is obviously something that they worry a lot about, losing income if they have to stay at home for 10 days. And the government have put financial incentives in place since September last year. There's a scheme called NHS Test and Trace Support Payment Scheme, which, if you're in work but on a low income, can't work from home and receive a number of benefits, you might be eligible for. There's also a top-up grant scheme that's administered by local authorities in England, but the take-up of that doesn't seem to be very high at the moment. It's quite hard to get the money. So there is a review in Whitehall underway about how to make those financial incentives, that financial cushion for people who have to self-isolate, better. Now, there's a proposal that we're talking about this morning is giving £500 to everybody who has to self-isolate. That's what's being reported in The Guardian. You spoke to George Eustace, the Environment Secretary, earlier on Breakfast, and this is what he said about the idea.
We've always had the £500 support payment for those that are on certain benefits. We've always kept this under review. We know that it's sometimes quite challenging to ask people to isolate for that length of time. Of course, at the moment, we're in a full lockdown anyway, so while people can leave to work, in many cases, people will be staying home anyway, but we constantly keep this under review. We've got to consider all sorts of policies.
George Eustace saying that there is a review going underway, that these things are always looked at. The issue around financial compensation for people on low incomes having to self-isolate. I don't think, though, this is something that the government is about to do. A government source told me this morning, a senior source, said that this paper talked about in The Guardian was drawn up by officials. It's never been near the Prime Minister. And there are fears in government it could create perverse incentives. The cost to the Treasury from for extending this to everybody who has to self-isolate would be huge. I think it's about £2 billion a month. But there's clearly a discussion underway within Whitehall about what to do.
Ben, thank you.
Lockdown restrictions in Northern Ireland have been extended until at least the 5th of March.
First Minister Arlene Foster said she understood people would be disappointed, but said the measures are an appropriate and necessary response.
Let's talk to our Ireland correspondent, Chris Page. Chris, morning to you, coming to us from Belfast. How unexpected was this? And there's that feeling, isn't it? I think a lot of us are thinking, well, we knew this was going to be a lot longer than anyone hoped for.
Yeah, I think people here, as in probably anywhere else in the UK have been resigned to the fact that there's a lot of pressure on the health service, that is going to continue for a few weeks, and that really ministers don't have much option but to be looking at longer lockdown measures. So lockdown here came into force about 4 weeks ago on Boxing Day. So, for example, here in Belfast city centre, most shops have been closed. All non-essential retailers aren't allowed to open. Leisure facilities closed too. We now know that rather than that ending at the start of February, well, it's going to go on a month longer until the 5th of March. And there was a pretty strong hint yesterday, actually, that ministers could look at this again in the coming weeks and decide to extend lockdown further, perhaps to Easter in the first week of April, or even beyond that. One big unresolved question is schools. They've been moved to remote learning so far for this term. It's only the children of key workers who are actually in schools on a day-to-day basis, but that was due to go on until the February half term. But then the plan was for children to go back to school. However, that is now under review in line with the other lockdown measures. So ministers will consider over the next week or two whether to extend the closure of schools for most pupils until the 5th of March, as well as everything else.
OK, Chris, thanks for taking us through all of that. Chris Page there, coming to us from Belfast.
President Biden has set out a national strategy to combat coronavirus, describing the task as a wartime undertaking.
It will include the production of more vaccines and increased testing. It's after the new commander-in-chief warned that the worst of the pandemic is still to come. Here's more from our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes.
The day started with a prayer, a moment of reflection before the new president got down to work. With a stack of executive orders to be signed, Joe Biden wasted no time in putting pen to paper. A signature is all it takes to reverse some of Donald Trump's key policies and to reinvigorate a coronavirus effort that Mr. Biden said had been a dismal failure.
The death toll will likely top 500,000 next month. The cases will continue to mount. We didn't get into this mess overnight, and it's going to take months for us to turn things around. But let me be equally clear. We will get through this.
The plan is ambitious. According to Mr. Biden, one of the greatest operational challenges America has ever undertaken. 100 million doses of the vaccine in 100 days. Working alongside Joe Biden, a familiar face, Dr. Anthony Fauci, America's leading infectious disease expert, who was part of the Trump administration's coronavirus task force. He said Mr. Biden's approach, with the federal government taking control of the vaccine rollout, could see normal life returning by the autumn.
The concern I have, and something we're working on, is getting people who have vaccine hesitancy, who don't want to get vaccinated, because many people are skeptical about that. So we really need to do a lot of good outreach for that. I mean, I don't know what the best case scenario for me is that we'd get 85% of the people vaccinated by the end of the summer.
Dr. Fauci also reflected on the sometimes awkward relationship he had with Donald Trump, especially when the former president said things that weren't based on scientific facts.
The idea that you can get up here and talk about what you know, what the evidence, what the science is, and know that's it. Let the science speak. It is somewhat of a liberating feeling.
The goal now, according to Dr. Fauci, is to rebuild the trust of Americans as the war on the coronavirus moves into a new phase. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.